My name is Ava Thompson. I'm 28 years old, and until recently, my life was the definition of quiet and predictable. I lived in a small coastal city where nothing much ever seemed to happen, and honestly, that was exactly how I liked it. I worked as an archivist at the local historical records office, a job most people would probably find painfully boring. But for me, it was perfect. There is something deeply comforting about history, about carefully preserving fragile documents and tracing the paper trails of lives that were lived long before mine. Old letters, faded photographs, brittle newspapers, they all tell stories if you know how to listen. My days were spent in cool, quiet rooms filled with the soft rustle of paper and the faint smell of dust and ink. My evenings were simple. A cup of chamomile tea, a good book, and the peaceful silence of my small apartment. It was an orderly existence. Safe. Predictable. I had always valued that. But all of it, every carefully arranged piece of my calm little life, shattered the day my Uncle Ben died. And what came after, I never could have prepared for. The call came on a Tuesday. It was the kind of gray, forgettable day that usually disappears from memory. The sky was overcast, and a light drizzle tapped softly against the archive windows. I was halfway through cataloging a box of 1970s municipal permits when my desk phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something, maybe instinct, maybe fate, made me pick it up. "Hello, this is Ava Thompson." There was a brief pause, then a woman's smooth, professional voice came through the line. She introduced herself. As Evelyn Reed from Reed and Halvorsen Estate Law, my stomach dropped instantly. You don't get calls from estate lawyers for good reasons. She continued gently, saying she was calling regarding my uncle, Benjamin Carter. For a second, the world narrowed into a tight tunnel around me. When she softly informed me that my uncle had passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 nights earlier, everything inside me went completely still. The words were careful and kind, but they still felt like they shattered something deep inside my chest. Uncle Ben. Gone. It didn't feel real. He had been fine the last time we spoke, laughing, teasing me about working too hard, promising I needed to visit the beach house soon. I gripped the phone tighter as the rest of the conversation blurred together. A small private funeral, his wishes, and a request for me to come into her office on Friday. The only word that truly stuck in my mind was the one she emphasized near the end, significant. He had left me something significant. At that moment, though, the word barely registered because nothing felt more significant than losing the man who had been more of a parent to me than my own ever was. Uncle Ben wasn't just family. He was my safe place growing up. While my parents were always busy, my mother Elena with her high-end interior design clients and my father, Robert, buried in financial reports and investment portfolios, Ben was the one who showed up. He was the one who took me to the ocean for the first time, the one who taught me how to skip stones across the water until my arm got tired, the one who encouraged my strange childhood obsession with old things and forgotten stories. "You've got an old soul, kiddo," he used to say, his deep laugh rumbling like distant thunder. "Don't ever let anyone rush you out of it." Some of my happiest memories lived in his beach house, long summers filled with salty air, sun-bleached deck boards, and the constant soothing rhythm of the Atlantic rolling in and out. That house wasn't just a building. It was where I felt most like myself. And now he was gone. Telling my parents should have been simple, but it wasn't. When I called them that evening, my mother answered on the second ring with her usual brisk, distracted tone, as if she had been in the middle of something more important. When I told her Uncle Ben had passed away, there was a short silence followed by a clipped sigh. She called it unfortunate. The word hit me like a cold splash of water. My father quickly came onto the line, but instead of asking how I was holding up, his first question was what the lawyer had said about Ben's estate. The question came so fast it made my chest tighten. I told them I didn't know yet, that I had a meeting on Friday, but the shift in their voices was already there. Mom mentioned how private Ben had always been about his finances, and Dad hummed thoughtfully about the seaside cafes Ben had owned for years. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I told them I was just grieving right now in the call ended soon after, but the uneasy feeling they left behind didn't fade. Friday arrived faster than I was ready for. Miss Evelyn Reed's office overlooked the harbor, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the gray sweep of ocean beyond. The space was immaculate and precise, much like the woman herself. She handed me a tissue before we even began, a small kindness that nearly broke me. She spoke gently about how much my uncle cared for me and how much he admired my independence. And then she slid a thick folder across the desk. Benjamin had been very clear, she said. I was the sole beneficiary of his residual estate. At first, I thought I had misheard her. Everything? She nodded calmly and listed it, his investment portfolio, his savings, and his primary residence. My heart stuttered when she said the words beach house. For a moment I couldn't breathe. That house wasn't just property, it was memory, childhood, and every safe moment I had ever tucked away inside myself. When she added that the property alone was valued at approximately $1.5 million, the number barely registered. All I could see in my mind was the weathered cedar siding, the wide glass windows facing the Atlantic, and the long wooden deck where Ben and I had spent countless evenings watching the sun melt into the sea. He had left it all to me. That evening I drove to the house alone. The keys Miss Reed had given me felt unusually heavy in my hand. The house stood exactly as I remembered, perched on the bluff, steady and familiar against the endless stretch of ocean beyond. For a long moment I simply stood in the driveway, breathing in the salty air and trying to steady the storm of emotions inside me. Then I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent hit me immediately, salt air, old wood, and something uniquely Ben. Everything was exactly as he had left it. His worn armchair still angled toward the window, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, and a framed photo of 10-year-old me, gap-toothed and grinning, sitting proudly on the mantel. My knees buckled before I even realized what was happening. I sank onto the living room floor and finally let the grief come, hot, sharp, and overwhelming. But beneath the sorrow was something else too, gratitude, and the first faint whisper of a warning I couldn't yet fully understand. Because somewhere deep in my chest, a quiet sense of trouble had begun to stir. When I finally gathered myself enough to leave the beach house that night, the sky had darkened into a deep navy blue, and the ocean was nothing more than a restless black shape beyond the windows. I locked the door carefully, holding the keys in my palm for a moment longer than necessary. The house felt different now. Not empty, never empty, but waiting. Waiting for me to decide what it would become. On the drive back to my apartment, I replayed every word Miss Reed had said. Sole beneficiary. Entire estate, beach house, $1.5 million. The numbers felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life, someone stronger, more decisive. Not me. I was just Ava, the quiet archivist who preferred preserving the past over making bold moves about the future. The next morning, my parents called before I even had time to pour my tea. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. Well? My father asked without greeting. I told them everything. I kept my voice steady, factual, almost detached, like I was reading from one of the historical documents at work. I told them about the investments, the savings, and finally, the beach house. There was a long pause on the line after I said that, too long. The whole house? My mother finally asked. Yes, I could almost hear the calculations happening in my father's mind. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't say, "Then must have loved you very much." Instead, he cleared his throat. That's substantial. That's a big responsibility for someone your age. There it was again, that subtle edge of condescension wrapped in concern. We should come down this weekend, my mother added quickly. Help you sort through things. Make sure everything is handled properly. It wasn't a question. It was an announcement. They arrived that Saturday in my father's polished silver sedan, pulling into the gravel driveway of the beach house like they already owned it. I had decided to stay there after that first night. My small city apartment suddenly felt cramped and gray compared to the open sky and rolling waves. When I stepped outside to greet them, My mother's eyes swept over the exterior of the house. With a critical gaze, "It really does need updating," she said before even hugging me. "The siding is charming, but it's dated, and those windows, we could do something much more modern." I felt my jaw tighten. She spoke about it as if it were a design project she'd just acquired, not her late brother's home. Inside, it got worse. My father walked slowly through the living room, not admiring the ocean view but assessing the structure. "Good bluff stability," he muttered, tapping a beam lightly. "The zoning here is restrictive." "That's excellent for resale value." Resale value. I hadn't even allowed the word sell to enter my thoughts yet. The house still smelled like Ben. His crossword puzzle still sat unfinished on the coffee table. I was still grieving. But my parents were already talking about market trends. By lunchtime, my mother had started rearranging furniture. She pushed Ben's worn armchair a few feet to the left. "This will open the room up," she said. Brightly. She created small piles of what she called clutter, a carved wooden duck Ben had bought at a harbor market years ago, a jar of sea glass we had collected together one summer, stacks of old nautical magazines. "These pieces make it look smaller," she explained. I waited until she left the room, then quietly put everything back exactly where it had been. My chest felt tight, like I was trying to protect more than objects, like I was defending memories themselves. My father cornered me later that afternoon with printed spreadsheets he had brought in a leather folder. He spread them out across the dining table. "Let's be practical, Ava," he began in the tone he used when explaining investment strategies to clients. "A property like this comes with taxes, maintenance, insurance. It's not sentimental, it's an asset." I stared at the ocean beyond the glass doors while he talked about capital gains and diversified portfolios. "The smartest move would be to liquidate. Sell the house, invest the proceeds under my management. You'd never have to worry about money again." His voice was smooth, persuasive, confident, as if this was the only logical conclusion. "I'm not selling," I said. Quietly, he sighed heavily. "You're being emotional." "Yes," I replied. "I am. My uncle just died." He looked almost irritated by that response, as if grief were an inconvenience. "Emotions fade. Financial mistakes don't." That sentence stayed with me long after he walked away. The pressure intensified the next day. My mother brought out glossy brochures for luxury condominiums in the city. "You'd be much more comfortable in a place like this," she insisted, flipping through images of rooftop pools and marble countertops. "This house is too isolated. Too much upkeep for one person." She smiled sweetly, but there was something sharp behind it. "We could sell this, get you a beautiful condo, and your father and I could manage the rest of the money for your future." Manage. The word echoed inside me. I set the brochure down slowly. "The house isn't for sale." Her smile tightened. "Don't be difficult, Ava. We're your parents. We know what's best." It was the same line they had used my entire life. When they chose my extracurriculars. When they dismissed my interest in history as impractical. When they told me I was too quiet, too sensitive, too attached to things that didn't produce profit. "I've made my decision," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "I'm keeping it." The shift in the room was immediate. The air grew heavy. My father's expression hardened, and my mother's carefully polished composure cracked just slightly. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. "Maybe," I replied. "But it's mine to make." They left that evening earlier than planned. The goodbye was brief, strained. As their car disappeared down the long gravel drive, I felt something settle inside me, not relief, not exactly, but clarity. This wasn't about helping me. It wasn't about responsibility or practicality. It was about control. It always had been. The following week was quiet. Too quiet. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. At first, I allowed myself to believe maybe they had accepted my decision, but deep down, I knew better. My parents didn't surrender easily. They regrouped, strategized, waited. I tried to focus on practical tasks. I met with Miss Reed again to discuss probate details and property transfers. She explained timelines, paperwork, and legal protections. I signed documents until my hand cramped. Each signature felt like a small step into a new version of myself, one that owned something substantial, something valuable, something worth fighting for. At night, I lay awake in Ben's guest room, listening to the wind off the ocean rattle faintly against the windows. The house felt safe, but my thoughts did not. I kept replaying my parents' expressions when I refused to sell, the flash of anger in my mother's eyes, the cold calculation in my father's silence. On the 8th day after their visit, my unease proved justified. I was standing on the deck watching the sunset bleed orange and pink across the horizon when I heard tires crunch against gravel. My stomach dropped before I even turned around. The silver sedan rolled into the driveway once more. They didn't get out immediately. I could see their silhouettes through the windshield, heads bent toward each other in intense conversation. When they finally stepped out, their faces were different this time. There were no polite smiles, no soft tones, only determination. As they walked toward the house, I felt the calm I had been carefully rebuilding begin to crack. Something was coming, something heavier than persuasion. And for the first time since inheriting the beach house, I understood that this wasn't just about grief or money. It was about a battle I had never wanted, but one I might soon be forced to fight. When the knock came, it wasn't the gentle tap of family. It was sharp, deliberate, and expectant. Ava stood still in the center of the living room for a few seconds. Her heartbeat slow but heavy, like distant thunder rolling in. She had known they would come back. What she hadn't expected was how quickly they would return, or how different their energy would feel when they did. Taking a steady breath, she walked to the door and opened it. Her mother stood there with a thin, carefully arranged smile, while her father's face had settled into something cool and professional. Gone was the soft parental concern. In its place stood the man who negotiated million-dollar deals for a living. "Ava," her mother said lightly as she stepped inside without waiting to be invited. "We need to talk." The sentence tightened something deep in Ava's chest. Her father followed, carrying a slim black briefcase. He placed it on the dining table with precise care, the metal latches clicking open in the quiet house, the sound far too loud for the moment. "I spoke with a colleague this week," he began, his tone measured and controlled, "someone who specializes in estate transitions." Ava didn't sit. She stayed standing near the doorway, arms loosely crossed, not defensive but certainly not welcoming. "And?" she asked calmly. He slid a folder across the table toward her. "And he agrees this situation is complicated." That word again, complicated, as if Ben's love had somehow created a problem that needed fixing. Ava stepped forward slowly and opened the folder. Inside were neatly printed documents, sections highlighted in careful yellow lines. Legal language, financial projections, property assessments. Her mother's voice softened into something almost coaxing. "Sweetheart, we're worried about you. This is a lot for one person to manage." Ava kept her eyes on the paper. Miss Reed didn't seem to think so. Her father's jaw tightened just slightly. "Miss Reed is a probate attorney. She handles paperwork. I handle long-term financial risk." There it was, the subtle undermining. Ava finally lifted her gaze. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Her father folded his hands neatly in front of him. "Sell the property. Transfer the liquid assets into a managed portfolio. We've already outlined a very favorable strategy." Ava exhaled slowly through her nose. "You already outlined it," she repeated quietly. Her mother stepped closer, her voice dipping into that familiar tone Ava had heard her entire life, the one designed to sound loving while applying pressure. "We're trying to protect your future, honey. You're not thinking clearly right now. You're emotional." For a moment, the old reflex almost surfaced, the urge to doubt herself, to second-guess her instincts, almost. But then Ava's eyes drifted to the corner of the living room. Ben's armchair sat exactly where she had put it back. Steady. Solid. Unmoved. Something inside her settled into place. "I am thinking clearly," Ava said quietly. The room went very still. Her father leaned back slightly, studying her, now really studying her, as if reassessing a calculation that wasn't adding up. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, and the warmth had completely left his voice. Ava closed the folder and placed it gently on the table. No, she replied. I'm not. A flicker of irritation crossed her mother's face. Ava, she said sharply, dropping the soft act for the first time, this house is sitting on extremely valuable coastal land. Do you have any idea what developers would pay for this location? The words hung in the air. Developers, not buyers, not families, developers. And suddenly, pieces began sliding into place inside Ava's mind, small things she hadn't fully processed before. Her father checking the bluff stability, the zoning comments, the unusual intensity behind what should have been simple financial advice. Her gaze sharpened. You already talked to someone, didn't you? For the first time since they arrived, both of her parents hesitated. It lasted less than a second, but Ava saw it. Her father's expression hardened immediately. That's not relevant, which meant it absolutely was. A slow, cold understanding began to spread through Ava's chest. This wasn't just concern. This wasn't just financial advice. This had been moving towards something much bigger. I'm not selling the house, Ava said again, more firmly this time. Her mother's patience finally snapped. You are being unbelievably naive right now. The words landed like a slap. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Ava didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't back down. Instead, she simply said, very calmly, it's my house. 3 words, but they changed everything. Her father closed the briefcase with a sharp click. The sound felt final. Fine, he said coolly as he stood. If you want to do this the hard way. Ava's stomach dipped. The hard way, she repeated, but he was already moving toward the door. Her mother right behind him, her expression tight with restrained frustration. At the threshold, her father paused and turned back just enough to meet her eyes. What Ava saw there made a chill crawl slowly down her spine. Not anger, not disappointment, calculation. You'll hear from us soon, he said. Then they left. The door closed. Gravel crunched as their car pulled away. And for the first time since this all began, Ava had the distinct, sinking feeling that the real fight hadn't even started yet. The silence they left behind did not feel peaceful. It pressed in on Ava from all sides, thick and watchful, like the house itself was holding its breath. For a long time she stood near the door, listening to the fading sound of tires on gravel until even that disappeared into the distant hum of the highway. Only then did she move. Slowly, deliberately, she walked back to the dining table and rested her hands on the smooth wood surface where her father's briefcase had sat. The air still felt charged, as if their presence had left something behind. She didn't cry. That surprised her. A younger version of herself would have questioned her tone, her firmness, her right to say no so directly. But now, standing in Ben's house with the ocean breathing steadily beyond the windows, Ava felt something unfamiliar settling into place inside her. Not anger, not fear. Something steadier. Resolve. Still. Resolve didn't quiet the unease curling in her stomach. Her father's final words echoed too clearly. You'll hear from us soon. That hadn't sounded like frustration. It had sounded like a plan. That night, the wind picked up along the coastline, rattling the deck railing and sending long whispers through the eaves of the house. Ava tried to focus on normal things, washing dishes, straightening the living room, answering a few overdue emails, but her attention kept drifting back to the same thought. What were they going to do? By morning, the question had sharpened into something harder to ignore. Ava woke early, the pale gray light of dawn stretching across the bedroom floor. She made coffee and carried the mug out to the deck, wrapping her sweater tighter as the cool ocean air brushed her skin. The horizon looked calm, peaceful. It felt deceptive. At exactly 9:12 a.m. Her phone rang. Ava glanced at the screen, and her chest tightened. It wasn't her parents. It was Miss Reed. Ava answered immediately. Good morning. Good morning. Ava, Miss Reed replied, her voice professional but edged with something that sounded very much like concern. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Ava's grip on the phone tightened slightly. No, what's going on? There was a brief pause on the other end. I wanted to make you aware of something before you received it formally, Miss Reed said carefully. Your parents' financial firm made an inquiry this morning regarding the property. Ava went very still. What kind of inquiry? She asked slowly. They requested preliminary development feasibility data, Miss Reed said, through a third-party commercial contact. For a moment, Ava just stared out at the ocean, her mind moving quickly, pieces clicking together with uncomfortable clarity. They hadn't been bluffing. They had already started moving. A slow breath left her lungs. Can they do anything without my permission? No, Miss Reed said firmly. You are the sole legal owner. But, she hesitated just slightly, but what? But aggressive buyers sometimes attempt pressure strategies when high value. Coastal land is involved, Miss Reed finished. I thought you should be prepared. Prepared. The words settled heavily in Ava's chest. Thank you for telling me, Ava said quietly. After they hung up, she didn't move for a long time. The morning sun had climbed higher now, turning the water bright and glittering, but the view no longer felt purely comforting. Now it looked valuable. Contested, targeted. Her parents weren't just disappointed, they were positioning. Ava set her empty coffee mug down on the deck railing and slowly exhaled. If they were expecting her to fold under pressure, they didn't understand something important. She wasn't the same person they thought she was. Then had known that. That afternoon, Ava did something she normally would have avoided. She started preparing. She created a dedicated folder on her laptop and began organizing every document related to the house, the deed, the probate filings, the tax records, the insurance papers. She made digital backups, then physical copies. She scheduled a follow-up meeting with Miss Reed. She even called the local insurance office to review her coverage. Each small action steadied her more. By early evening, the anxious tightness in her chest had shifted into something sharper and more focused. Her parents might have expected hesitation. Instead, they were getting resistance. Just after sunset, as the sky melted into deep shades of purple and gold, Ava stepped out onto the deck again. The wind had calmed, and the ocean rolled in slow, steady waves against the shore. For the first time since inheriting the house, she spoke out loud into the quiet air. I'm not going anywhere. The words didn't sound shaky. They sounded certain. And somewhere deep down, Ava had the unmistakable feeling that whatever came next, she was finally ready for it.